just gotta keep forcing it to go through.
We'll have this figured out by the end of the day.
Good.
Yeah, there's a go. I think so.
Can you verify on your phone before we kick off?
Same link. It's not taking.
Can you verify on my phone?
If you don't mind. I just don't see what the problem is. Oh, wait a minute, there it is.
Good. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, everyone, welcome to track 2 after arranging our live stream challenges here. I'd like to welcome Kerry Hazelton. For those that don't know him, he's a regular. He's another one of our national caliber experts that flies in custom to the Idaho Falls BSides Arena. All that is due his own background as well as his talk title correction. And he has he's taken off his mask, so let's maintain at least 6 feet distance away from the speaker. Take it away, Kerry.
Thank you, Wayne. All right, start my timer now. Good morning, everyone. How we doing? Look lively, come on. I know it's a woo! There we go. All right, so what's here on the projector behind me? Who can identify this? What is this little nasty bug that's been causing all these problems lately? What is it?
Clues, I'm going to go with the COVID.
Okay, you're on the right path. So there's a scientific name for it. What is
Something from my daughter's lunchbox.
it? SARS-CoV-2. This little nasty bug, unfortunately, has caused everyone to basically work from home remotely. What's that?
That's from the other side.
Okay. Yep. And of course, students can work from home. I know it's reversed, unfortunately, so I'm going to see if I can fix that. Give me 1 minute. Let's see if I can reverse this here. What's that?
That's again from the other side.
Oh, it's from the other side? Okay. Give me 1 minute. Where is... I hate this thing sometimes. Hang on. There we go. It's reversed. I'm not sure why. It shouldn't be reversed. I have to go this way, I guess. Let's see full screen. We'll do it this way. Because if I present it, unfortunately, it's reversed. I don't know why. There we go. Now we're in business. Okay. Unfortunately, because of that little nasty bug, it feels like we have to do this phone number, which we all don't understand. Of course, some of us don't like it either, but it is what it is. And of course, it feels like we have to isolate inside of a vault. Let's protect ourselves. So with that, the title of my talk, the corrected title of my talk, by the way, is MIGRATE, COVID-19 and Operation Work from Home. And of course, me being the humorous sucker that I am, or how the bad guys took advantage of COVID and really screwed us over. So who am I? So as Wayne mentioned, I am a regular here. I actually was here for the first BSides Idaho Falls in 2018. I am an InfoSec teacher and mentor. I do teach classes at BSides all over. I've done it for the last 4+ years. Currently, I work as a senior security engineer for CVent, and cloud security is my passion. I'm very huge on cloud security. And I do recognize a few of my students here from yesterday's workshop on cloud forensics. I'm also an adopted son of Idaho Falls. I grew up here. Wasn't born here. I grew up here, graduated from high school here in 1995. Then I left. And then, of course, when I heard BSides was coming here, like, hometown. I'm coming home. Even if it's one time a year, I will come home to BSides. So a couple of caveats before we get started. And of course, I like to use pop culture in all my references, and Wayne is obviously well aware of that. What you're about to see and hear is simply my take on the subject. It should not be considered as gospel, nor does it reflect the views of my colleagues or my employers, aka the Obi-Wan Kenobi rule. If you're not familiar with that, I will tell you what it is. You'll find a great many truths clings to our point of view. Although I prefer to interact with my audience by having a talk with the group discussion versus talk actually session, please refrain from asking questions during the presentation. I will make every attempt to allow for questions after the end, time permitting. I'll be honest with all of you, I hate lectures. They put me to sleep. That's why I prefer group discussions, such as this one. So let's talk about a brief timeline of COVID-related events. So what happened? Well, first of all, March 2020, World Health Organization, they declared a global pandemic. And as a result of that, over 50% of US-based workers are now suddenly forced to work from home. Hey, don't be in here, go home, we'll figure out how to get you set up to work remotely. Companies needed to quickly adopt work from home strategy to tell all workers to remain productive. Now this poll right here is actually taken from a Harris poll right after WHO started, or declared a pandemic rather. So IT departments had to rapidly scale up their projects to enable remote connectivity as a result of this. Laptops, VPNs, collaboration software, you name it. Some businesses chose to leverage DOS. Now, quick question for all of you here, what is DOS? What is DOS?
Desktop as a service.
Desktop as a service. Who here has heard of AWS workspaces, Amazon workspaces? Show of hands. A couple of you. That basically is desktop as a service. It is a virtual desktop environment. And as you see here, AWS reported a 10-scale increase in urgent requests because now everybody had to work remotely, didn't have a choice. So what were some of these challenges? How hard can this be to help people work from home and continue to be productive? Well, let's start with laptops. How many laptops do we have to buy? How many do we have to harden? What type of remote connectivity software do we need and how we scale up? So we're talking VPNs, single sign-on portals, you name it. Do we need additional hardware? Obviously, we've got a bunch of servers sitting in our data center somewhere. Do we need to scale those up to balance the workload? What collaboration software do we need? Do we use Zoom, Office 365, Google? What do we use to keep everyone connected? If we can't get laptops, do we leverage DOS? Again, Amazon Workspaces being the prime example of that. How do we bridge DOS with our on-prem servers? Do we migrate fully to the cloud? Some businesses chose to do that, some businesses chose to have a hybrid solution. Is cost going to be an issue? What are our costs going to be like? What's the impact to our bottom line? Obviously, we have our CAB expenses, which is upfront, versus operational, which is day-to-day. What security measures will we need to consider now that everyone's going to be working remotely? How easy is it going to be to implement all of this? How do we monitor our employees' activities while they're remote? That's a good question. And obviously, how can we teach our employees to not click on any suspicious links or messages? So what should we be worried about? So here's a question. Do we worry about our own employees working from home remotely, or do we worry about the proverbial attacker? Which is the greater threat, the internal or external? Which is greater? I'm calling the back row back there somewhere. I'm looking right at her too. Which is greater, internal or external? Yes.
Internal.
Why?
Because people aren't really aware of cybersecurity.
People don't know what's word cybersecurity. Okay. Which is greater, internal or external?
Internal.
Okay. What about front, internal or external?
I would still say internal.
Okay. So everyone pretty much agrees it's internal. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
Yeah, because people show up to work with colds too.
So this is a good quote that I borrowed from Dickinson Wright, and obviously you see the URL there in the bottom right corner, about how cyber criminals love a good crisis and they're willing to take advantage of it no matter what. And as a result of that, businesses implement strategies in response to the coronavirus pandemic. They also have to prioritize data protection and cybersecurity concerns. Obviously, dealing with cloud, and as my students remember, I like to use the analogy of the Tootsie Roll Pop. If you're not familiar with that, your provider, whether it be AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, the candy shell is their responsibility. The good stuff, the data, is your responsibility. That candy shell gets penetrated, what happens to all your data? It goes away. So because of that, employees working remotely can create risks to businesses in several ways. Obviously, they use personal devices to access corporate networks. increased phishing and other scams, and violation of various industry and specific state laws. So how did COVID-19 change our thinking when it comes to security? This is an article from Forbes, Indications for Telework and Cybersecurity. It was, actually I think it was 6 months after. So October 2020 was when it was produced. And the tip of the proverbial iceberg, as I like to call it, after work from home became the new normal shortly after the pandemic, Forbes cited the result of a June 2020 poll of over 350 cybersecurity executives about what new challenges they were facing. And the results were rather telling. Approximately 1 in 3 respondents stated their ability to detect potential threats was either reduced or completely lost. 70% of respondents stated they saw an increase in attacks against their networks. 35% stated they had to reduce their security budget because of the pandemic. That's worrisome. If you have to cut costs because of the pandemic, who's going to monitor your networks? Who's going to respond to the threats? Another report from Taney, and this is from Business Wire, reveals that 90% of organizations experienced an increase in cyber attacks because of COVID. Just how big is that iceberg anyway? So over 1,000 CXOs, by CXOs we're talking chief executive officers, chief technology officers, chief information officers across 4 countries: United States, United Kingdom, France, and Germany. You're gonna like this one. 98% of all respondents say they experienced security challenges within the first 2 months after fully going work from home. The top 3 challenges were identifying new personal devices that are connecting to their networks, overrun VPNs, and increased security risk from video conference applications. 88% of respondents stated they had difficulty with patching machines remotely because they couldn't get to them because of the overrun VPNs, while 43% said the indicated issue was with patching personal devices because those personal devices are accessing their corporate networks. We're not technically responsible for them. 90% of respondents said they saw an increase in attacks, and data exposure, business email transaction fraud, and phishing, top 3. 93% of respondents indicated they had to cancel or delay projects because of the pandemic. There's a huge impact to the bottom line. So this is an article from New York Post. This was dated September 14, 2021. Actually, I take that back. April 8, 2020, there was a high school teen arrested after Zoom bombing. What is Zoom bombing? I'm going back row again. What is Zoom bombing?
Accessing the Zoom meeting you're not supposed to be in.
Pretty much. So according to the article, it's defined as an unwanted guest joining a video call with intention to disrupt and harass. And this incident occurred in April 2020 with Madison Public Schools in Connecticut. For anyone watching from that area right now, I do apologize, but I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention here today. There was a Connecticut teen charged with a 5th-degree computer crime, 5th-degree computer speech to commit crime, and breach of peace. And obviously, because the individual in question was most likely under the age of 18, that name was never released, and was most likely never tried as an adult either. So basically, this users break into meetings that migrated to Zoom, and of course, it wasn't just companies; it's also nonprofit organizations as well. The meeting links and sometimes passwords were published online and were likely taken up by so-called internet trolls and shared in forums such as 4chan or in Discord. And of course, these attacks were sometimes also recorded and published on social media just for laughs. And I see some people shaking, nodding their heads. They probably remember some of these incidents. So the FBI office in Boston issued a warning as a result of that, recommending use of passwords, waiting rooms, not publishing links on social media, and set your screen share to host only. That came straight from the FBI in Boston as a result of this. So now another article from Tech Republic. This is a fun one. COVID-19 related scams cost Americans more than $98 million since the start of 2020. Obviously that number has gone up since then. Just how much has it gone up? Good question. From January 2020 to last month, over 363,000 fraud cases related to the coronavirus reported to the Federal Trade Commission. More than $558 million was lost due to fraud. That's a huge number. Online shopping, most common attack vector. Why? Why would online shopping be the most common attack vector?
Because everyone's locked in.
What's that?
Because everyone's locked in, they're not shopping in person.
Everyone's locked in, people working from home, they're probably not paying attention, not being focused on what they're supposed to be doing. So what are they doing? They're browsing online shopping sites. Not supposed to do it on your work computers, obviously. But if you're on your personal device that's connected to the corporate network, guess what? Attacker will see that. So here's a question. Here's something that's interesting. Second most common attack vector, vacation and travel. Over 45,000 reports, 80 million in losses. Top 3 contact methods, email, website applications, and text messages. Top 3 payment methods, obviously credit cards, debit cards, payment apps for other services. Now here's a question for all of you. Which age group do you think was the most commonly hit?
20 to 28.
You're close. 30 to 39. Over 21,000 reports. Biggest group. Those aged 60 to 69 suffered a combined $107.6 million in losses. So what about those who were over 80 and up? What was their average cost per loss? Who wants to take a shot at that? Speak up.
25 million.
25 million. $1,000 on average. Which is kind of interesting, really, if you think about it. You think they'd be the ones with the biggest hit. It wasn't this time around. So here's a question for all of you. Are businesses still liable for all of that? Yes or no?
How do you mean? What do you, more clarification? How are business?
Okay. If they are breached or hacked, are they still liable for the loss under COVID? I see you nodding your head.
I'd say yeah. mean,
I see you shaking your head.
They're still responsible for their cybersecurity, whether it's their pandemic or not.
Short answer is yes. You want to know why? For example, let's look at CCPA, which we all love to harp on. You have under CCPA, you have 30 days to resolve the incident or face additional actions. It still counts, still applies. So what about another one? What about HIPAA? Think HIPAA still applies? Patient with COVID-19 diagnosis, Human Health and Services, they released guidance of COVID-19 disclosures. Violations are still enforceable by penalties and fines. It doesn't matter if it's coronavirus related or not. It still applies no matter regardless. And that's coming from HHS itself directly. What about GDPR? Back corner, does GDPR still count in this case because of COVID? Yes or no?
I'd probably say yes.
Yeah, the answer is yep, it is. Because of COVID, it counts as a special category of personal data, and therefore specific guidelines still needs to be adhered to under GDPR. So how do we fix all this? Well, our good friends over at CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, obviously avoid clicking on links, unsolicited emails. Trust but verify. Always confirm the person sending it is actually doing it. Use trusted sources for up-to-date information about COVID, and obviously don't disclose personal or financial information in emails. Other recommendations. What's that?
But that prince is going to give you that money.
Before making a donation to charity or another nonprofit organization, make sure that they're legitimate, ensure remote access systems fully patched, obviously, and into under-improved system network monitoring, and obviously multi-factor authentication, and of course tested BCTR, which is business continuity and disaster response. So what did I learn? Because I used to work for an employer, which I can't mention, as COVID hit. I'm still in a non-disclosure agreement. But what did I learn from all of this? Well, always be thinking ahead, because if cloud computing is going to be the end goal, have a solid migration plan in place. Not everything will be lift and shift ready. Not everything will migrate to cloud one for one. Virtualization is a different beast altogether compared to physical. Small pieces. Don't move all your data at once, because you run the risk of data corruption or data loss. RBAC or ABAC. RBAC is role-based access controls. ABAC, attributes-based access controls over individual user policies. They're more granular. You can apply them to multiple groups at once. Educate, educate, educate. I know we always talk about it here at BSides, but we need to help others stay vigilant, but not to the point where they become desensitized. And they just don't think half the time. Be flexible when working with other teams or groups, because they may not be just as well as you. Some people may have a harder time. So you gotta be flexible when you're working with other teams or groups, especially if you're the one helping to set up and execute that migration plan to cloud. Now it's your turn. Now remember, this is gonna be a group discussion, so whoever answers the question, I'm opening up the floor first before I jump in.
A question: when you talk about liability, I see two angles to this. The one is the consumer is clicking on all these phishing links or like fake websites and stuff, and the other one, like you mentioned earlier, is the fact that they got hacked, right? So when you're looking at liability, I know you mentioned some legal avenues, but really, how enforceable is it, and whose fault? I understand there's fault on both sides, but how does it come into play?
Well, let's open up the floor first. Who wants to jump in before I jump in? I'm going to call on somebody. Jeremiah.
Nope.
Nope. Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. So the answer to your question was basically, if I understand it correctly, liability. You know, if a customer clicks on a link, it's one thing, but whereas if it's a business, it's a completely different story altogether. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. Good question. From a legal perspective, obviously I'm not a lawyer. Okay. I'll make the disclosure right now, full disclosure, I'm not a lawyer, okay? If the customer clicks on a link, say on the corporate website in question, okay? If it's embedded, technically it does fall upon that business because it's their website. They should have maintained it and make sure it's up to date and everything. By that same token, okay, it is important for that business to have some type of disclosure in place because of COVID, say, hey, FYI, you want to make sure that you're clicking on a legitimate link, and if anything's suspicious, you need to let us know about it. So there's both things in play here, okay? Now, ultimately, because it's the customer's data that is being entrusted to that company's responsible no matter what. If you're familiar with called the shared responsibility model, you know, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, your physical layer, okay, that's the cloud provider's responsibility. Everything above that in the cloud, that's the company's responsibility. Going back to the analogy I used earlier, okay? Candy shell is your provider's responsibility. That gooey stuff in the middle we like so much, that is the business's responsibility. They are the data custodians. According to that shared responsibility model, the customer trusts them with the data, and ultimately it's up to them, it's their responsibility. They're liable for it. That answer your question? Okay. Okay. Jeremiah.
Not a question, but a statement. One of the good things that happened was because of COVID is I think a lot of companies have recognized that you can do certain jobs outside of the office.
Yep.
And that saves them a ton of money because they don't have to have the office space for everyone to come in. At the same time, there's a lot of companies that have taken this time to say, oh yeah, let's see how it works with people working at home. They're like, yeah, we can't trust people working from home. you have to be in the office. So
Yep.
It's a give and take, but I think a lot of good has come with this.
And to go off of that, as much as I hate to use the term zero trust, I'm sure some of us have heard it one time or another. I do know that more and more companies are adopting the zero trust model because of this, where they're basically saying if you have a personal device, it's not coming on our network, period. And if you do allow it on our network, guess what? We have the ability to remotely wipe your device when you leave the company. Device management, exactly.
So, COVID actually improved my job. What was happening, I'm the only, was at the time, the only remote employee on a project where the rest of the group was tightly integrated at a single facility. And they would have conversations around the water cooler. Well, when everybody went home, no more conversations at the water cooler. Suddenly I'm included in all the decisions. So, I'm not complaining.
No, that's understandable. Like I said, there are some things that, you know, in my experiences, because I actually was very fortunate to work remotely before the pandemic started. You know, but that being said, when COVID hit and there was this mass push to move to cloud, you know, what I can share with all of you here is I was ultimately responsible for setting up all the policies for all the groups, for all the roles that are going to be used. And we did use RBAC, which is role-based access controls. And to a degree, we had tags, which are attributes-based access controls. The more granular you get, the better off you are in the long run because they're easier to apply across the board to, again, multiple groups of roles versus writing individual policies. Okay. Are there any other questions?
So looking forward, as we think we might be returning to a hybrid environment,
Hopefully.
what sustains in this and what do we really need to look out for in this hybrid environment where all our conference rooms, full-time video, whatever people are going to promote in order to encourage the links between physically located employees
And that's an excellent
what
question.
What do we have to worry about next?
That is an excellent question, Wayne. It all comes down to how much risk are you willing to accept? How much risk can you reduce? Because you're never going to get rid of risk no matter what. Okay? What is your risk appetite versus your risk acceptance? Is what it's going to boil down to, from my perspective, anyway. You know, and how can you gain the trust of your employees that don't want to come in? How can you gain the trust of, say, the students that don't want to come in, which I get, okay? But it all comes down to how much risk versus how can you enable that trust? Say, hey, we have the protocols in place. You know, we've taken all the precautions. This is what you need to do as a remote student or remote employee to make sure that we minimize those risks as much as possible.
Yeah, here's the observation I made is that we had some meetings in our new beefed up conference rooms and we went back to our personal BPC software because they're having challenges with the new hybrid enabled Mongo BPC system that
Right.
was trying to launch us both. And so when faced with that, often we get into user errors, configuration, security risks.
Yep.
So just wondering how you think that attack surface is going to evolve.
And to that point, if you're migrating to that to cloud, obviously if it's physical, it's not going to migrate one-to-one, obviously, because nothing ever does migrate one-to-one. So the question becomes, how do you best configure it in a cloud environment, and then what type of access controls do you put around it to make sure it's only your employees or whoever needs access to it, your trusted groups, have the right access controls, right policies in place to get to it and keep everyone else out. So whether it's VPN or SSL port or whatever it may be, there's multiple options to approach it. You know, as much as I like to be able to help directly, unfortunately my employer would probably say no, which is fine. But there are also ways to get information on how to do all of that. I can at least point you in the right direction if you're willing to talk after this.
I think in line with his statement that companies realizing that some people can work on do their jobs remote is the fact that it's everybody's responsibility to be cybersecurity aware.
Yep. And because of that, because there's such an overabundance of information, people get desensitized pretty quickly.
I had a C-suite tell me to stop sending spear phishing tests
Yep.
to employees because they were getting too much and it was too annoying.
Yep.
Oh, good luck.
Yep, it happens. Okay. Are there any other questions or any other topics related to my talk today before I wrap it up?
What sort of, I guess, mistakes or things to watch out from the cloud providers' perspective? Right? At least for my personal
And you're right. You're right. And cloud providers, they do help their customers make sure that they have the proper things in place. They'll notify customers and say, hey, your environment's being penetrated. Did you authorize this? Okay, so they're aware of all that. But again, going back to the shared responsibility model, everything in the cloud is the business's responsibility. Anything else?
In the realm of all of this risk, there's also these budding companies offering cyber insurance.
Well, that's a good one.
What are some of your thoughts on that? Because a transference doesn't fix any type of issues with a breach.
And you're right, it really doesn't fix it. But remember, you're never going to get rid of risk no matter how hard you try. The best thing to do is to reduce it, and then obviously, to your point, transfer to somebody else. Share the burden. Okay. As far as cyber insurance goes, I have seen insurance providers offer policy saying if your company gets hacked and your data gets exposed, okay, in order to minimize the potential losses from all of these customers, these lawsuits, we have, say for example, $10 million policy. $10 million says if you get hacked, you get sued, these $10 million that we're giving this policy will help offset some costs. And it's a good thing you asked it because I actually know of an insurance provider on the East Coast who's actually looking at writing cyber insurance policies.
So I have a follow-up on that.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't really understand the risk, at least I've seen in the industry that I'm working in, nuclear. A lot of people are still unaware of how much risk is really there. This is even like the owners of these systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if that's also prevalent for these cyber insurers. Like, are they mispricing it? Do you think they're actually? Do you think there's good quantification?
Yeah, that's again a really good question. And to that, I really don't have a whole lot of data on that, unfortunately. Okay, as much as I'd like to be able to dive more into that, that is something that I could probably do and follow up at a future talk. But we'll see what happens. Okay, I think I'm about out of time. So with that, BSides Idaho Falls organizers for bringing me home. More importantly, Cloud-based Idaho for hosting this venue. Awesome new facility. My employer, CVent, for sponsoring my trip. Slide tab is provided by Sides Carnival. Twitch community, I did have a couple of Twitch members help me out, looked at my slide deck, and kind of gave me some additional material to work with. Bethesda Softworks, obviously, because of reference to Fallout. Unsplash because of the photos. Obviously, all of you for being here, and those watching right now on YouTube, those going to watch later. Any questions? You can always find me on Twitter at Prof Kilroy. You can also use my alternate on Twitter account, Cloud416CTF. I am the one who developed the Cloud Forensics Challenge. And again, just have some of my students here in the audience today. Thank you for being here so much. Also on LinkedIn. And with that, be safe, all of you. Be kind. And I'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. A few administrative announcements. So we now have approximately an hour and a half lunch break on your own. You can explore other things here that may still be set up, but there's you're next to downtown for those that are traveling from outside of Idaho Falls, or 17th Street has kind of the chain restaurants, but there's some interesting small restaurants, family-owned things in downtown. We're going to reassemble here after lunch at 1:30 or 13:30 for those from Air Force speak or Navy speak. The keynote speaker is going to be very entertaining, very engaging talk.
Is he here or is he going to be virtual?
He's going to be virtual.
He's going to be virtual, so we'll work with you. But I think that our video system over in the big room, I think, has been holding out pretty well. So that'll be an interesting talk. So anyway, lunch on your own, and be sure to